The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Matter behaves predictably. Light travels at a constant speed. Energy follows defined pathways through the cosmos, obeying rules that scientists across 1,000 civilizations have mapped, catalogued, and built civilizations upon. But what happens when something arrives that defies every sensor, every theory, every rational explanation? What happens when the impossible doesn't just knock on the door of human understanding, it crashes through it at several hundred miles per second, trailing lightning and leaving scorch marks on the fabric of reality itself? This is that story. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. Stardate 51247.3. The USS Voyager was running silent through a largely unmapped region of the Delta Quadrant, approximately 54,000 light-years from Federation space and, as far as anyone aboard was concerned, approximately 54,000 light-years from anything resembling good news. Captain Catherine Janeway stood at the center of the bridge with a coffee cup in one hand and a stellar cartography report in the other, the twin expressions of a woman who had made peace with the impossible becoming routine. They had survived the Borg. They had survived species 8472. They had negotiated with species that communicated through bioluminescent skin patterns and traded with civilizations that considered rudeness a capital offense. The Delta Quadrant had thrown everything it possessed at Voyager's crew, and Voyager's crew had thrown it right back. Nothing in 7 years of deep space survival had prepared them for what Lieutenant Harry Kim detected at 0347 hours. "Captain?" His voice carried the particular frequency of a man trying very hard not to sound alarmed and failing completely. "I'm reading an energy discharge approximately 200,000 kilometers off the port bow. It's—" He paused, fingers moving across his console with increasing urgency. "It doesn't match anything in the database." Janeway set down her coffee. "That was how you knew something was serious." "On screen." The view screen shifted from the familiar carpet of stars to a specific region of space where something was very clearly wrong. The darkness there had a quality to it, a shimmer, like heat rising from summer pavement, except that space had no pavement, and no summer, and absolutely no business shimmering. The shimmer intensified, crackling at its edges with arcs of golden-white electricity that bore no resemblance to any natural phenomenon Voyager's sensors had ever catalogued. It built in the space of 10 seconds from a curiosity to a spectacle, the electrical arcs thickening into ribbons, the ribbons weaving into something that looked disturbingly like a tear, a long, ragged rip in the visible universe, backlit by a light source that existed somewhere else entirely. "Red alert," Janeway said calmly. "Shields up. Tom, hold our position." Tom Paris had already pulled them to a full stop, hands steady on the helm. "Holding at 200,000 kilometers. Whatever that is, it's putting out energy readings that are off the charts. Tuvok, are you getting this?" "I am getting considerably more than I would prefer." Tuvok's hands moved across the tactical console with Vulcan precision, his expression as close to troubled as his physiology permitted. "The discharge appears to be consistent with a localized dimensional rupture, a breach between this continuum and an adjacent dimensional framework. The energy signature does not match known Q continuum phenomena, nor does it correspond to any catalogued anomaly in Starfleet records. So it's new," Janeway said. "Definitively." The tear widened. The light pouring through it was the color of a lightning strike, white at its core, gold at its edges, and it moved with a quality that no light source had any right to possess. It moved like it was alive. It pulsed and surged, not randomly, but rhythmically, as though something on the other side was pushing against the boundary with intent. The crew of the bridge held a collective breath. Then something came through. He arrived the way a comet arrives. Fast, brilliant, and completely unconcerned with the expectations of observers. One moment the tear was there, vast and electric and humming with dimensional energy. The next, something red and gold streaked through the gap like a thrown ember, spinning end over end through the vacuum of space with the particular grace of a man who had not expected to end up in vacuum. The tears sealed behind him with a thunderclap of released energy that sent a shockwave rippling outward, rocking Voyager despite her shields. On the view screen, the red and gold figure tumbled in the zero-gravity silence of deep space, arms moving, legs kicking, clearly alive, clearly conscious, and clearly having an extremely bad day. "Harry," Janeway said. "Tell me that's a life sign." "Human," Harry said, disbelief thick in his voice. "Or very close to it." "Humanoid, definitely." "One life sign. Captain, he's surviving in open space without a suit. Somehow. Lock on a transporter signal." She was already moving toward the command chair. "Get him aboard before he drifts." "I'm trying, but the energy readings around him are interfering with the transporter lock. Whatever came through that tear with him, it's wrapping around his biosign like. I don't have an analogy for this. It's like trying to grab smoke. Try harder, ensign." 30 seconds later, with Harry Kim performing what could generously be described as a miracle of transporter modification, the shimmer of materialization appeared in Transporter Room 2. Janeway was already moving toward the turbolift, Tuvok 2 steps behind her. What materialized on the transporter pad was a young man in red and gold, a suit that fit him like a second skin and bore lightning bolt insignia at the ears of his cowl. He was on his knees the moment he materialized, one hand on the transporter pad, chest heaving with ragged breaths that suggested he had just run farther than any human being had any right to run. His eyes were open, brown, sharp, scanning the room with the reflexive alertness of someone accustomed to threats, and even as his body registered exhaustion, his legs were already shifting beneath him, weight coming forward, preparing to move. "Hey!" His voice was rough but clear. "Please tell me you speak English." Janeway stepped through the transporter room door, took in the red suit, the lightning, the impossible energy readings still flickering across the transporter technician's console, and the young man who had just arrived from another dimension, and she did what she always did when the impossible happened. She introduced herself. "I'm Captain Catherine Janeway of the USS Voyager." "You're safe." She paused, measuring him. "Do you have a name?" He looked up at her. Something in the steadiness of her voice seemed to reach him, to slow the animal panic that had been running behind his eyes. He exhaled. "Barry," he said. "Barry Allen." He looked around the transporter room, the clean Federation lines, the soft lighting, the technology that was simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. "Where am I?" "Because I was in Central City about 45 seconds ago, and this is..." He gestured broadly at everything. "This is very much not Central City." "No," Janeway agreed. "It is not." She studied him for a moment longer, something between scientific curiosity and the particular brand of maternal pragmatism that had carried her crew through 7 years in the Delta Quadrant. "Mr. Allen, I suspect we have a great deal to discuss." Behind her, Tuvok was already raising his communicator. "Doctor to Transporter Room 2. We have a patient requiring evaluation." A pause. "And bring your most open mind." The doctor's most open mind, as it turned out, had significant limits. He stood in sickbay with his medical tricorder extended toward Barry Allen like a man offering bread to an unpredictable animal, his holographic face cycling through expressions that ran the gamut from professional curiosity to outright scientific offense. The readings he was getting were not readings so much as arguments. Contradictions stacked upon contradictions, the tricorder essentially throwing up its hands and reporting that the patient was simultaneously a normal human male in his late 20s and a phenomenon that had no right to possess a pulse. "Your cellular regeneration rate," the doctor said in the tone of a man who had just found something unexpected inside a sandwich, "is approximately 40 times the human norm. Your mitochondrial activity suggests an energy consumption that should, by any reasonable metabolic standard, require you to eat roughly 800 calories per minute simply to maintain basic cellular function." He lowered the tricorder. "You are not eating 800 calories per minute." I had a pretty big breakfast, Barry offered. That is not funny. It's a little funny. The doctor turned to Janeway with the expression of a man requesting permission to be exasperated. She gave him a small nod that conveyed both sympathy and the implicit instruction to keep going. They were in sickbay, the clean white space humming with the soft persistence of medical equipment, and the room felt subtly crowded, not because of bodies, but because of the energy Barry Allen carried with him. Even sitting still on the biobed, there was a quality of compressed potential to him, like a spring under tension, like weather about to happen. B'Elanna Torres had arrived 7 minutes after the transporter materialization, summoned by sensor readings so anomalous that the ship's computer had flagged them as a potential systems malfunction. She stood at the secondary diagnostic console along the sickbay wall, pulling up display after display with the focused intensity of an engineer who had encountered something that personally offended her understanding of physics and intended to resolve the matter through sheer intellectual force. "These readings don't make sense," she said, not for the first time, and not entirely to anyone in the room. "Tuvok, look at this. His bioelectric field is generating a secondary resonance pattern that's propagating through Voyager's EPS conduits. He's not doing anything. He's just sitting there, and he's interfering with our power relays." "I noticed," Tuvok said from his position near the door, hands clasped behind his back, watching Barry with the particular Vulcan quality of attention that was absolutely not staring. "The interference pattern is consistent with an energy field that exists partially outside our dimensional framework. The field appears to be anchored to Mr. Allen's physiology but extends, in a technical sense, slightly beyond the boundaries of our physical continuum." Barry looked between them. "You're saying I'm leaking into another dimension?" "Imprecisely, but effectively, yes." "That's okay. That's actually not the weirdest thing that's happened to me this month." He paused, reconsidering. "Top 5, maybe?" 7 of 9 entered sickbay without announcement, as was her custom, moving directly to B'Elanna's console and angling the display toward herself without asking permission, as was also her custom. B'Elanna's jaw tightened in the particular way that preceded either an argument or a remarkably productive engineering collaboration. With 7, it was often both simultaneously. "The secondary resonance pattern Lieutenant Torres has identified," 7 said, studying the readings with the flat efficiency of someone cross-referencing a personal database that happened to contain the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 assimilated civilizations, "is not a random phenomenon. It has structure. It propagates according to consistent mathematical principles that bear a partial resemblance to the subspace variance equations governing transwarp conduit geometry." She looked up from the console. "Whatever energy source powers this individual, it operates on principles that have analogs, imperfect analogs, within our understanding of subspace mechanics." "You're saying you can analyze it?" Janeway asked. "I am saying it is analyzable. Whether I can do so completely is a separate question." 7 turned to look at Barry directly, with the unself-conscious frankness of someone who had never entirely relearned the social protocols around staring. "What is the source of your energy?" Barry met her gaze. He had, Janeway noted, the quality of someone accustomed to being stared at, not with comfort, exactly, but with practiced equanimity. "It's called the speed force," he said. "It's—" He paused, visibly assembling an explanation for an audience he correctly identified as requiring precision. "It's a fundamental energy field that exists in my universe. It's connected to motion, to kinetic energy, to the concept of velocity itself. I'm connected to it. Have been since I was struck by lightning during a particle accelerator accident a few years ago. The silence that followed had a particular scientific quality. The silence of people rapidly recalculating. A naturally occurring energy field," B'Elanna said slowly, "that permeates your universe and is accessible through your nervous system. When you put it that way, it sounds almost reasonable." "It sounds nothing of the sort," the doctor said. "It sounds like magic." "That's what my friends say." Barry almost smiled. "I usually tell them it's science we don't understand yet. An epistemically sound position, Tuvok observed. Though incomplete. B'Elanna was back at her console, pulling up the EPS interference readings alongside the tricorder data the doctor had compiled. Her expression had shifted from offense to something approaching hunger, the look of an engineer who had been handed a problem that actually deserved her full attention. "The reason your readings keep contradicting themselves," she said, "is because you're not entirely here. Your energy field has a component that exists in a dimensional layer adjacent to ours. Our sensors are designed to read this dimension. They keep trying to collapse your readings into a single coherent picture, and they can't because part of you, the speed-force connection specifically, is somewhere our sensors can't fully access." Barry absorbed this. "So to your equipment, I look like a glitch." "You look like several glitches," B'Elanna corrected. "Arguing with each other. The more significant concern," Seven said, cutting through the diagnostic discussion with the precision of someone whose priorities were differently ordered, "is not what our sensors cannot read. It is what other sensors can." She pulled up a navigational overlay on the adjacent screen. A sector map of the region of Delta Quadrant space Voyager was currently traversing. Mr. Allen's speed-force resonance is propagating outward from this vessel at a detectable rate. We are, in effect, broadcasting his presence. She let that sit for a moment. In this region of space, being detectable carries significant consequences. The room shifted. The quality of attention changed. From scientific curiosity to the more focused, practical alertness of a crew that had spent 7 years learning what it meant to be noticed by the wrong people in the wrong quadrant. Janeway looked at the sector map. Then she looked at Barry Allen, the young man from another dimension, sitting on a biobed in her sickbay, leaking speed-force energy into her EPS conduits, broadcasting his location to whatever happened to be listening in 54,000 light-years of uncharted space. "Mr. Allen," she said carefully, "I need you to tell me everything about what you can do, and everything about what you can't. Right now, before we go any further." She paused. "Because in this part of the galaxy, the difference between those two things may determine whether any of us see tomorrow." Barry looked at her. The compressed energy quality was still there, the spring, the weather, but something in his expression settled into seriousness. "How much time do you have?" "Less than I'd like," Janeway said. "Start talking." Barry Allen talked for 40 minutes. He talked about Central City and the particle accelerator and the night the lightning found him. He talked about the speed force the way someone talks about breathing, not as a power he possessed so much as a relationship he maintained, a constant negotiation between himself and something vast and fundamental that had decided, for reasons neither he nor anyone else fully understood, to make him its chosen conduit. He talked about running through time, about phasing through matter, about the particular sensation of moving faster than thought while remaining entirely, stubbornly human underneath the velocity. Janeway listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, with the scientific attention of a woman who had made first contact with enough civilizations to know that the shape of a story mattered as much as its content. Tuvok listened and calculated. The doctor listened and updated his medical files with the barely concealed enthusiasm of a hologram who had just been handed the most interesting patient in the history of the Delta Quadrant. 7 of 9 did not so much listen as process, her eyes distant in the middle distance of someone cross-referencing incoming data against an enormous internal archive. B'Elanna had stopped listening after approximately 12 minutes and started running equations. When Barry finished, the silence had a different quality than the one that had followed his earlier explanations. This one was heavier, weighted with implications that everyone in the room was beginning to independently calculate. "The dimensional rupture that brought you here," Tuvok said, breaking it first. "You described it as a consequence of exceeding a previous velocity threshold while attempting to outrun an antimatter detonation." "An antimatter explosion?" Barry nodded. "Yeah. Someone, it doesn't matter who, was going to level 3 city blocks. I was trying to get everyone clear and contain the blast. I ran faster than I ever had before, And somewhere in the middle of that I felt the speed force. It's hard to describe. It felt like a seam gave way. Like I punched through something that was supposed to hold. The dimensional membrane between your continuum and ours, Tuvok said. It was not a question. In your universe, you were moving at sufficient velocity to generate enough kinetic energy to breach the barrier between dimensional frameworks. He paused. That is a deeply alarming capability. You're not the first person to tell me that. I suspect I will not be the last. Tuvok moved to the console Seven had been using, pulling up the dimensional rupture data they had recorded at the moment of Barry's arrival. The breach sealed itself upon your transit. This suggests the membrane possesses self-correcting properties, which is consistent with established Federation theory regarding dimensional barriers. However, the energy required to re-breach it deliberately, from this side, would be extraordinary. Our warp drive does not generate the specific type of kinetic energy your speed force produces. The physics are, he considered the word, incommensurate. Barry had been following this with the focused attention of a man hearing his worst suspicion confirmed in real time. So you can't just point me at the tear and send me home. Not with current technology, no. The room absorbed this. Barry's jaw worked briefly, something moving behind his eyes that was not quite fear and not quite despair but occupied the uncomfortable territory between them. Then it settled, replaced by the particular expression of a man who has learned, through repeated catastrophic experience, to solve problems in sequence rather than all at once. Okay, he said. Okay. One thing at a time. He looked at Janeway. What do you need from me right now? It was, Janeway reflected, exactly the right question, and the fact that he asked it, rather than demanding to know what she intended to do for him, told her something important about who Barry Allen was. Right now, she said, I need to understand your current capabilities. Not what you can do at full capacity. What you can do today, in this universe, with whatever limitations apply. Barry was quiet for a moment. He had, she suspected, been hoping this question would not come up quite so directly. The speed-force connection is muted. When I came through, it felt like running through water. Like the signal is there but something's interfering with it. He glanced at B'Elanna. Your engineer figured out part of it. The subspace geometry here is different from what the speed force is designed to propagate through. My body is recalibrating, I think. I can still run fast. A lot faster than a normal human. But the top end, the real top end, isn't accessible right now. Define fast. B'Elanna said without looking up from her equations. Currently? Barry considered. Probably somewhere around Mach 3. Mach 4 if I push it, but that's where I start feeling the dimensional friction. It's like hitting a wall that isn't quite solid. B'Elanna looked up. Mach 3 is still roughly 2,300 miles per hour. Inside a starship. I'd be careful about the corners, Barry agreed. The phasing capability? Tuvok asked. Functional. Mostly. It takes more concentration than it should. He demonstrated, briefly, just a flicker, his hand passing through the edge of the biobed with the casual impossibility of someone walking through a wall, the speed force lightning crackling pale gold around his fingers before he solidified again. The doctor made a sound that was either professional assessment or wounded scientific dignity. The time manipulation, the really deep stuff, running fast enough to actually affect the timeline, that's offline. The speed force won't let me access it here. I think it's a safety mechanism. The dimensional physics are different enough that a serious temporal incursion could do damage I couldn't predict or correct. A safety mechanism built into your power source, Seven said, and something in her tone suggested she found this simultaneously logical and offensive. How is it implemented? I don't entirely know. The speed force it's not a tool. It's more like a relationship. It has its own judgment about what's appropriate. He paused. That probably sounds insane. It sounds, Tuvok said carefully, like a non-corporeal intelligence governing the parameters of your abilities. Barry stared at him. I never thought about it that way. I would recommend beginning to. Chakotay, who had been standing quietly near the sickbay entrance for the past 20 minutes, spoke for the first time. Captain, we have a more immediate problem. He had his own console active, pulled from the bridge feed, and his expression carried the calm steadiness of a first officer delivering bad news with deliberate composure. Those energy readings 7 flagged, the speed force resonance propagating outward from the ship. We've got a response. He turned the console so the room could see it. A vessel just dropped out of warp approximately 40,000 kilometers off the starboard bow. Configuration matches Hirogen. He paused. Hunting vessel class. Fully armed. The room's atmosphere shifted the way pressure shifts before a storm, suddenly, completely, and with the particular physicality of people who had encountered the Hirogen before and carried the memory of it in their bones. Barry looked around at the faces in the room. He did not know what a Hirogen was. He could read, however, the quality of concern that moved through people who did, and he was intelligent enough to understand that the specific flavor of alert that had entered Janeway's eyes was not routine. Who are the Hirogen? He asked. Janeway was already moving toward the door, pulling her command posture around her like armor. Hunters, she said simply. The most dedicated ones in the Delta Quadrant. She paused at the threshold, looking back at him. And you just announced yourself to them. Barry stood up from the bio-bed. The speed force flickered around him, pale gold, instinctive, responding to the spike of adrenaline that the word hunters produced in a man who had spent years learning exactly what it meant to be pursued. Then we should probably talk fast, he said. Janeway almost smiled. Mr. Allen, on Voyager, we always do. The Hirogen vessel held position. That was the detail that worried Janeway most. A vessel that held position was a vessel whose crew was thinking, observing, calculating, deciding. In her experience, the Hirogen were most dangerous not when they were charging but when they were patient. Patience in a predator meant a plan was forming. She stood at the center of the bridge, Voyager's command deck humming around her with the familiar sounds of a crew shifting from routine alertness to something sharper. Tuvok was at tactical, his hands moving across the console with Vulcan economy. Tom Paris sat forward at the helm, weight subtly redistributed toward the edge of his seat. Harry Kim tracked the Hirogen vessel on long-range sensors, calling out readings in the clipped shorthand of someone monitoring a situation they hoped would not escalate and suspected would. Barry stood beside Chakotay near the aft stations, still in his red and gold suit, watching the view screen with the focused attention of a man rapidly assembling context from unfamiliar pieces. Janeway had made a decision, quickly and without extensive deliberation, to keep him on the bridge. Partially because she wanted him where she could see him. Mostly because she suspected that if the situation deteriorated, having him in a separate compartment would be approximately useless. They're scanning us, Harry reported. Deep penetrating scan. They're not being subtle about it. They never are, Tom said quietly. They've isolated the anomalous energy readings, Tuvok said. The scan is concentrating specifically on Mr. Allen's biosign and the associated speed force resonance. They are not scanning for Voyager. They are scanning for him. Barry absorbed this without visible alarm. They locked onto my energy signature from 40,000 kilometers. From considerably farther, Tuvok corrected. The resonance propagation extends well beyond this vessel. They likely detected you before we were aware of their presence. Hailing frequencies, Janeway said. They're not responding, Harry said. Then, 3 seconds later. They're moving. Slow approach. Maintaining weapons lock. On the view screen, the Hirogen vessel resolved from a distant configuration into something more distinct. Angular, predatory in its geometry, designed by a culture that had built its entire aesthetic around the concept of pursuit. It moved toward Voyager with the deliberate unhurry of something that did not consider fleeing a relevant variable. Barry stepped forward. You've dealt with these people before. Yes, Janeway said. How did it go? A pause that contained significant history. Variably. The Hirogen opened a channel without being invited to, which was consistent with everything Janeway knew about them. The Alpha, identifiable by the particular quality of authority in his stillness, filled the view screen. His armor was scarred in ways that communicated biography rather than damage. Behind him, his hunting vessel's interior moved with the organized efficiency of a crew that had done this before and expected to do it again. Federation vessel. His voice carried the specific register of someone addressing an obstacle rather than a peer. You carry something that does not belong in this quadrant. Something that radiates energy unlike anything our sensors have recorded across 4 decades of hunting. His gaze moved, with unmistakable deliberateness, past Janeway to Barry. We will have it. Barry stepped up beside Janeway before she could respond. It was not an aggressive movement. Just a clarification of presence, a quiet assertion that he was a participant in this conversation rather than its subject. I'm Barry Allen, he said. I'm not a trophy. The Alpha studied him the way a collector studies an acquisition. You are the most remarkable prey this crew has encountered in 11 years of hunting. Your designation is irrelevant. My designation, Barry said evenly, is the person you're about to have a problem with. Janeway placed a hand briefly on Barry's arm, not restraining, just grounding. She had her own words ready. Alpha, this individual is under Voyager's protection. Any aggressive action toward this vessel or its crew will be met with full defensive response. She kept her voice level, authoritative without being combative, threading the precise needle that Hirogen negotiations required. We have no interest in conflict. Nor do we, the Alpha said. We have interest only in the hunt. He cut the channel. They're charging weapons, Tuvok said. Evasive pattern Delta. Janeway said immediately. Full impulse. Tom, give me options. Working on it, Tom said, hands already moving. Problem is, in open space we don't have a lot of geometry to work with. They're faster than us at impulse and they know it. Barry was watching the view screen, watching the Hirogen vessel begin its acceleration toward them, and something in his expression was shifting, the thoughtful assessment of someone running calculations of a different kind. How many crew on that ship? Typically 4 to 6, Chakotay said. Why? Because I'm thinking about going over there. The bridge went briefly quiet in the specific way it went quiet when someone said something that was simultaneously alarming and tactically interesting. At your current speed force capacity, Tuvok said carefully, moving through open vacuum at sufficient velocity to reach their vessel before they reach weapons range would require Mach 4 sustained, for about 8 seconds, Barry said. I can do that. Probably. He looked at Janeway. If I board their ship, I can disable their weapons systems before they fire. Non-lethally. I don't hurt people if I can avoid it. And if you can't sustain Mach 4? Then I have a very bad 8 seconds. Janeway looked at him for a long moment, measuring the certainty in his voice against the dimensional friction he had described, calculating the variables with the rapid precision of a captain who had learned to make difficult decisions in compressed time frames. We don't know enough about their ship layout for you to navigate it effectively. Feed me a schematic from your database. 30 seconds. Mr. Allen. Captain? His voice was quiet but firm. They're going to fire on your ship because of me. Let me handle this. Another volley of weapons fire, warning shots, Hirogen style, impacting Voyager's shields and dropping them 4%, decided the conversation. Janeway looked at Tuvok. Tuvok gave her the microscopic nod of a Vulcan who had run the numbers and found them acceptable within defined risk parameters. 30 seconds, she told Barry. Then you have a schematic and a window. The speed force crackled gold around his hands. That's all I need. The schematic took 22 seconds. Harry Kim pulled every Hirogen vessel layout Voyager's database contained, overlaid them against the specific configuration on the view screen, and produced a working approximation that was somewhere between educated guess and informed speculation. Barry studied it for the remaining 8 seconds with the speedreader's absorption of a man whose brain processed information considerably faster than his current velocity suggested, committing corridors and power junctions and weapons relay nodes to memory with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned, through painful experience, that preparation was the difference between a plan and a disaster. "Weapons relay is here," Harry said, highlighting a junction point near the vessel's midship section. "Disable that and they lose forward torpedo capability. Secondary disruptors are routed through a separate power coupling on the port side, aft section." "2 stops," Barry said. "Got it. The hull is not designed for external boarding," Tuvok said. "You will need to phase through it. Phasing through alien hull materials I've never encountered before while moving at Mach 4 in vacuum." Barry nodded. "Great. Fine. Completely reasonable. You expressed confidence 30 seconds ago," Tuvok observed. "I'm still confident. I'm just also honest." He pulled his cowl into place, the red and gold of his suit suddenly purposeful rather than incongruous on Voyager's bridge. He looked at Janeway. "Keep them talking for as long as you can. I need 30 seconds inside the ship, maybe 40. I'll give you what I can," Janeway said. "Mr. Allen?" He paused. "Come back." It was a simple instruction. It carried, in its simplicity, the weight of a captain who had lost enough crew to know that simple instructions were the ones that mattered. Barry nodded once. Then he moved. The transition from Voyager's bridge to open vacuum was managed through the ship's emergency hull access point on Deck 11, a system designed for EVA operations that had never been intended for use by someone planning to move at supersonic speeds through the void between 2 spacecraft. The airlocks cycled in 4 seconds. The external door opened into the absolute cold and silence of deep space, the Hirogen vessel hanging 38,000 kilometers distant and closing. Barry stood in the airlock threshold for exactly 1 second, long enough to feel the speed force respond to his need, the familiar electricity crackling up through his nervous system, the golden white energy that was both power source and companion gathering itself around him with the eagerness of something that had been waiting. It was muted. He felt that immediately. The dimensional friction B'Elanna had named accurately, the subspace geometry of this universe pressing against the speed force like a hand against a window. The connection was real and present but filtered, like hearing a voice through water. He could work with it. He had to work with it. He pushed off and ran. Running in vacuum was a problem he had solved before through a mechanism that remained technically inexplicable even to the scientists who had studied him most carefully. The speed force created a localized field around his body that provided traction against the fundamental fabric of spacetime itself, converting kinetic intent into actual momentum regardless of the presence or absence of a physical surface. In his own universe, at full capacity, he could cross 38,000 kilometers in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Here, with the speed force throttled by dimensional physics he didn't fully understand, he covered the distance in just under 9 seconds. It was, objectively, extraordinary. It felt like running through wet concrete. He hit the Hirogen hull at an angle, the phasing engaging half a second before impact, his molecules shifting into the specific vibrational frequency that allowed matter to pass through matter, the alien hull material offering resistance he didn't expect, a sensation like pressing through something that was simultaneously solid and grudging. He pushed through it, felt the speed force spike with the effort, and emerged inside the Hirogen vessel in a shower of golden lightning that scattered across the deck plating and left scorch marks that would confuse the hunters for weeks. The interior of the Hirogen ship smelled of metal and something organic and old. The accumulated residue of hundreds of hunts, trophies mounted along the corridor walls, species from across the Delta Quadrant preserved with the particular pride of collectors who measured their lives in acquisitions. Barry registered all of it in the fractional second it took him to orient, match the schematic to his surroundings, and start moving. The weapons relay junction was exactly where Harry's approximation said it would be. A Hirogen hunter was standing in front of it. The hunter was large, They were all large, Barry noted, filing this information away with the calm practicality of someone who had fought beings considerably larger than himself, and armored, and reacted to Barry's appearance with a speed that suggested either exceptional reflexes or forewarning. A weapon came up. Barry was already moving, the speed force pulling him sideways faster than the hunter's targeting could track, the disruptor bolt cutting through empty space where he had been standing a tenth of a second before. Barry didn't hit the hunter. He ran past him, close enough that the speed force lightning discharged against the hunter's armor, delivering a shock that was significant enough to drop the hunter to his knees without doing lasting damage, and reached the weapon's relay junction in the same motion. Disabling it required 3 seconds and the careful application of phased fingers into the relay housing, speed force energy disrupting the power coupling without destroying it. The junction went dark. The forward torpedo systems dropped offline. He heard the ship's internal comm system activate, the hunters communicating in their language, voices carrying the sharp cadence of a crew responding to an intrusion. 2 of them were between him and the secondary disruptor coupling in the aft section. He could hear their footsteps, heavy and purposeful, converging on his position. Barry changed direction and ran. On Voyager's bridge, the change registered immediately. Their forward torpedo systems just went offline, Tuvok said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to respect. Secondary disruptor still active. He's moving toward the aft section. Keep hailing them, Janeway said. I want them focused on us, not on what's happening inside their own ship. The Hirogen Alpha's face reappeared on the view screen, and for the first time since the encounter began, his expression contained something other than predatory certainty. There was a quality there, not fear, nothing so simple, but the particular recalibration of a hunter who has discovered that the prey has moved in a direction he did not predict. "What have you done?" he said. It was not entirely a question. "I've done nothing," Janeway said, with the perfect composure of a woman who was doing quite a lot. "Perhaps your systems are malfunctioning." The Alpha stared at her. On the secondary screen, Barry's bio-sign moved through the Hirogen vessel at Mach 3, trailing lightning, heading for the aft power coupling. Janeway kept her expression neutral and waited. The secondary disruptors went offline 40 seconds later. Barry materialized back through Voyager's hull, phasing through Deck 11 with slightly more control than his outbound transit, the speed force managing the molecular shift with the improved confidence of a system that had now done this twice and was beginning to understand the local physics. And arrived in the corridor outside engineering in a crackle of gold lightning that left Ensign Vorik, who happened to be passing, with an expression that would require considerable Vulcan meditation to process. "Sorry," Barry said, already moving toward the turbolift. "Excuse me. Coming through." On the bridge, the tactical picture had changed. The Hirogen vessel had dropped to minimal power, its primary weapons systems dark, its approach vector abandoned. It held position 35,000 kilometers distant, not retreating, but no longer advancing. The Alpha's face on the view screen had settled into an expression that Janeway had not previously observed in any Hirogen encounter. It took her a moment to identify it. He was genuinely interested. "Your crew did not do this," he said, when Barry stepped off the turbolift onto the bridge. The Alpha's gaze moved to the scarlet speedster with the focused attention of a man revising a significant assumption. "You went aboard my vessel, through the hull, and disabled our weapons without killing a single hunter." "That was the plan," Barry said. "My hunter reported that you struck him with electrical discharge and left him alive and uninjured." A pause. "He is not certain how to feel about this. Tell him I said sorry. I meant it." The Alpha was quiet for a moment. Around him, on the Hirogen bridge, his crew moved with the careful energy of people who had been surprised and were not accustomed to the sensation. "In 41 years of hunting across this quadrant," the Alpha said finally, "I have never encountered prey that boarded my vessel to disable rather than destroy." He seemed to be examining this fact from multiple angles, like a man turning an unfamiliar object in his hands. "Explain your reasoning." Barry glanced at Janeway. She gave him nothing, no instruction, no guidance, just the steady attention of a captain watching a first contact moment develop and choosing not to interfere with it. He looked back at the Alpha. "Because hurting you wasn't the point. Stopping you from hurting them was." He gestured briefly at Voyager's crew. "There's a difference. In our culture there is no difference. The hunt is the purpose. The kill is the completion. I know cultures like that," Barry said. "They're usually pretty miserable to live in." The Alpha's expression moved through something complex. "You are either very brave or very foolish. Most people who know me well say both." Janeway ended the Hirogen contact 20 minutes later with something that fell short of an agreement and considerably exceeded a standoff. A provisional understanding that the Alpha would withdraw his vessel while he considered what he had witnessed, with the implicit acknowledgement that pursuit of Voyager and its unusual passenger was, for the moment, suspended. It was not a treaty. It was the Hirogen equivalent of a predator pausing mid-hunt to reassess whether the prey was actually prey. She would take it. What she could not take, and what 7 of 9 delivered to her ready room with the particular efficiency of someone who considered softening bad news an inefficient use of time, was the sensor report that had been compiling since Barry's boarding action. "The speed force discharge inside the Hirogen vessel," 7 said, placing a pad on Janeway's desk, "generated a secondary energy pulse approximately 3 times the magnitude of Mr. Allen's baseline resonance signature. It propagated outward from the Hirogen vessel's position at warp-equivalent speeds." She paused. "The pulse was detectable across a considerable distance." Janeway looked at the pad. At the propagation radius. At the overlay showing which known vessels and sensor arrays fell within that radius. Her expression did not change, because she had practiced not letting it change in exactly these circumstances. "How long?" she asked. "At standard Borg long-range probe sweep intervals for this region, they would have detected the anomaly within the hour." 7's voice carried its customary flatness, which Janeway had learned to read as the register 7 used when the news was genuinely bad. "However, I have been monitoring subspace frequencies consistent with Borg communication since Mr. Allen's arrival. The collective did not wait for a probe sweep." Another pause, fractionally longer than necessary. "They were already listening." Janeway set the pad down. "How long until intercept?" "At transwarp speeds, a Borg vessel could reach our position in approximately 14 hours. "Could or will?" 7 met her eyes. "Will." Barry took the news the way Janeway was beginning to understand he took most news, with a beat of genuine reaction, quickly organized into forward motion. He sat across from her in the ready room, the speed force settling into its baseline flicker around his hands, and listened to the full situation report without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The Borg," he said. "Tell me about them." Janeway told him. She did not soften it. The collective, the assimilation, the hive mind, the fundamental ideology of perfection through absorption. She told him about Wolf 359. She told him about what they had done to Picard. She told him about 7, which required a separate and careful telling. She watched his face as she spoke and saw the specific quality of attention that distinguished people who understood the stakes from people who thought they did. When she finished, he said, "They want to assimilate me. They want to assimilate the speed-force connection," she corrected. "Whether they understand the distinction is unclear. The Borg assess value in terms of biological and technological distinctiveness. Your connection to an extra-dimensional energy field representing a fundamental force of another universe is." She searched for the appropriate word. "Catnip," Barry said. "I was going to say unprecedented. But yes." He stood and moved to the ready room's viewport, looking out at the stars with an expression she recognized, the look of someone calculating not whether they would face something but how. "If they assimilate me," he said, "and the speed force transfers with the connection, A Borg drone with speed force capability, Janeway said, would be unlike anything the collective has ever incorporated. The tactical implications would be catastrophic, Barry said quietly. For both quadrants, she agreed. He turned from the viewport. The gold lightning was more pronounced now, tracing patterns across his hands and forearms that had the quality of something responding to emotional state, the speed force reacting to the specific category of threat Barry Allen was processing. Then we can't let that happen, he said. Whatever it takes. Janeway nodded slowly. Outside the viewport, 14 hours of stars moved silently past. Seven has a theory, she said, about the speed force resonance and Borg nanoprobe interaction. She paused. You should hear it before you decide what whatever it takes means to you. Barry looked at her steadily. It means the same thing it always means. He said it without drama, without performance, the quiet certainty of someone who had made this particular decision so many times it had stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like breathing. Janeway believed him completely. 7 of 9's theory began, as her theories often did, with a statement that sounded like a weapon. If the Borg assimilate Mr. Allen, she said, standing at the head of the briefing room table with the composed authority of someone who had been Borg and carried that history as both wound and resource, the speed force connection will not transfer cleanly to the collective. It will resist. The senior staff sat around the table. Janeway, Chakotay, Tuvok, B'Elanna, Tom, Harry, the doctor, and Barry himself, the latter still in his suit, the speed force flickering at a frequency that had become, over the past several hours, as familiar to the room as the hum of the warp core. Neelix had provided coffee and something he described as nutritionally optimized for accelerated metabolisms, which Barry had consumed in its entirety in approximately 4 seconds and politely requested more of. Explain resist, Janeway said. 7 moved to the wall display, bringing up a molecular diagram that B'Elanna had helped her construct over the previous 3 hours, a visualization of what happened when Borg nanoprobes encountered speed force energy at the cellular level. The diagram was, to put it plainly, alarming. Borg nanoprobes function by interfacing with existing biological systems and gradually replacing organic function with technological equivalents. The process assumes a stable biological substrate, a body whose fundamental operating parameters can be mapped, replicated, and integrated into collective architecture. She highlighted a section of the diagram where the nanoprobe simulation met the speed force resonance field. Mr. Allen's biology is not stable in this sense. The speed force permeates his cellular structure at a quantum level. It is not a power he uses. It is a condition he exists in. Like asking the Borg to assimilate a river, Barry said, following the diagram with the focus of a man who understood that this particular theory concerned his continued existence as an individual. An imprecise analogy, but directionally accurate. The nanoprobes would interface with his biology and immediately encounter an energy field that operates outside their programming parameters. The speed force does not behave like any biological or technological system the Borg have previously assimilated. It would not integrate. It would. She paused, selecting the word with care. Argue. Argue. Chakotay repeated. The nanoprobes would attempt to map and replicate the speed force connection. The speed force, functioning as what Commander Tuvok has correctly identified as a form of non-corporeal intelligence governing Mr. Allen's abilities, would resist the mapping process. The result would be a recursive conflict at the cellular level. Nanoprobes attempting to assimilate a system that is simultaneously biological, dimensional, and partially non-corporeal. She let the diagram run its simulation. The result was visually dramatic, the nanoprobe models destabilizing, the speed force resonance expanding unpredictably, the cellular structure caught between 2 incompatible processes. The conflict would generate an energy discharge. Inside a Borg drone, that discharge would propagate through the neural interface to the collective's shared consciousness. The briefing room was very quiet. You're saying the speed force would fight back? Barry said. Through the hive mind. I am saying the attempt to assimilate you would introduce a destabilizing energy pattern into the collective's neural network. The scale of that destabilization would depend on how many drones maintained active connection to the assimilation interface at the moment of conflict. Seven looked at him directly. If the discharge propagated through a sufficient number of simultaneously connected drones, the effect on the collective could be significant. How significant? Janeway asked. Potentially catastrophic. For the Borg. The silence reconvened, with additional weight. B'Elanna leaned forward. So what you're describing is a scenario where Borg assimilation of Barry accidentally turns him into a weapon that could seriously damage the collective. Not accidentally, Seven said. Inevitably. The physics do not permit another outcome. Tom Paris looked at Barry with an expression caught between sympathy and the particular impressed discomfort of someone processing a very large idea. So the thing that makes you the most valuable target in the Delta Quadrant is also the thing that makes assimilating you potentially catastrophic for the Borg. That tracks, Barry said quietly. My life has a theme. The strategic implications, Tuvok said, redirecting with Vulcan precision, are significant in multiple directions. If the Borg understand the risk, they may approach the assimilation attempt with unusual caution, modified nanoprobe delivery, isolated drone interface, shielded neural connection. If they do not understand the risk, they'll attempt standard assimilation, Janeway finished, and the consequences will be unpredictable. For both parties. Barry had been watching the diagram run its simulation repeatedly, the speed force flickering in patterns that had taken on a responsive quality, as though the energy itself was processing the information being presented about it. 7. He said. When you were part of the collective, did you ever encounter an assimilation attempt that failed? Not resisted, actually failed at the cellular level. 7 was quiet for a moment that contained more history than silence usually held. Once, she said. A species with a neurochemical defense mechanism. The nanoprobes could not interface with their synaptic pathways. The drones that attempted the assimilation experienced a feedback event. She paused. They were disconnected from the collective. Permanently. Disconnected, Barry said. Not destroyed. Disconnected. Isolated. Left without the hive mind that had been their only conscious experience for years or decades. Another pause. For a Borg drone, disconnection is. She searched for words that her reclaimed individuality had not entirely made easy to access. It is not a gift. Not initially. Barry looked at her with an understanding that was specific and quiet. But it's a beginning. 7 held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Yes, she said. It is. Janeway had been listening to all of this with the focused attention of a captain assembling a situation into a strategy. She looked at the diagram, at the simulation, at Barry. You're thinking about going to the Borg, she said. Not an accusation. A recognition. I'm thinking about what happens if they board this ship and attempt assimilation of the crew while trying to get to me. He met her eyes. I'm thinking about what happened to Picard. What you told me. The speed force was steady around him now, not agitated, not reactive, but present, the way weather is present before it commits to a direction. If my connection to the speed force does what Seven's model says it does when nanoprobes engage it, if it disrupts the hive mind through connected drones, you'd have to be inside the cube, B'Elanna said. Close enough for enough drones to interface simultaneously for the discharge to propagate meaningfully. I know. That's insane, Tom said. Probably, Barry agreed. He looked at Janeway. But I've done insane before. Usually it works out. Janeway looked at him for a long moment. Outside the briefing room viewports, the stars moved in the slow parade of a ship at impulse, holding position, waiting for 14 hours to become 13, 12, 11. We have time, she said. Not much. But enough to build this into something better than insane. She looked around the table. Ideas? Now. All of them. The senior staff of Voyager leaned forward together, and the work began. The plan took 11 hours to build and approximately 4 seconds to start going wrong. It was, Tuvok observed afterward, a perfectly adequate ratio for this crew. The architecture of it was sound. Janeway had insisted on that, running every variable through the senior staff with the systematic rigor of a scientist who understood that insane plans succeeded not through recklessness but through preparation so thorough that recklessness became indistinguishable from precision. The core concept was Barry's, refined by Seven's Borg expertise, engineered by B'Elanna, and stress-tested by Tuvok until its failure points were at least known quantities rather than surprises. Barry would board the Borg cube. Not through assimilation, through choice, moving under his own power, phasing through the hull at a vector 7 identified as maximally distant from active assimilation alcoves. Once inside, he would move through the cube's central plexus, the neural hub through which the greatest concentration of simultaneously connected drones maintained collective interface, and allowed the speed force to discharge naturally in response to nanoprobe contact. Not a weapon. Not a controlled detonation. A natural consequence, triggered deliberately, in the location where its propagation through the hive mind would be most significant. Voyager's role was containment and extraction. B'Elanna had modified the transporter to account for the speed force resonance interference, a 12-hour engineering effort that had produced a targeting algorithm capable of locking onto Barry's biosign through the Borg cube's jamming field, at least theoretically. Seven had provided the cube's likely internal configuration based on collective architecture she carried in memory like scar tissue. Tuvok had calculated firing solutions for every contingency he could model, which was most of them. The Borg arrived 3 hours ahead of Seven's estimate, which suggested either that the collective had been closer than anticipated or that they had accelerated upon confirming the speed force signature. The cube dropped out of transwarp 200,000 kilometers from Voyager. Massive, geometric, wrong in the way that Borg vessels were always wrong, their architecture the visual language of a philosophy that found beauty in consumption. It was 3 kilometers across and carried, by Seven's estimate, approximately 11,000 drones. "They're not firing," Harry said, tracking the cube's approach with the tight focus of someone monitoring a very large, very dangerous thing that was behaving unexpectedly. "No weapons lock. No tractor beam. They're scanning," Tuvok said. "Intensive. They've identified Mr. Allen's biosign and the speed force resonance." A pause. "They are being cautious. They've never encountered anything like him before," Seven said. "The collective will want to understand before it acts. It is calculating the most efficient assimilation approach. How long does it have to calculate before it stops calculating and starts acting?" Tom asked. "Unknown. Minutes, perhaps. The collective is not patient by nature, it is simply thorough." Barry was standing at the front of the bridge, watching the cube on the view screen with an expression Janeway had come to recognize over the past 14 hours, the forward-weighted attention of a man who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for the moment to execute it. The speed force was bright around him, brighter than it had been since his arrival, and she realized with a start that it was growing. The 11 hours had done something. The recalibration B'Elanna had predicted was progressing, his dimensional acclimation advancing. He was recovering capacity. "Barry," she said quietly. He looked at her. "How are you feeling?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Better than I was. The speed force is clearer. Like the interference is thinning." He flexed his hands, lightning trailing between his fingers with a fluency that had been absent at his arrival. "I'd estimate I'm at 80, maybe 85%. Enough? Enough to do this. Whether it's enough for everything that comes after," he half smiled. "Ask me later." The Borg cube completed its approach and stopped, holding position 50,000 kilometers distant. Then it did something that made every person on Voyager's bridge recalibrate their assumptions simultaneously. It hailed them. Not with the standard Borg declaration, the collective voice, the assimilation ultimatum, the particular cadence of resistance being futile. It hailed them with a targeted, individual transmission directed specifically at Barry's biosign. When the channel opened, the voice that came through was the Borg Queen's, syntactically precise, carrying the specific quality of a consciousness that was simultaneously singular and infinite, intimate and vast. "Anomaly," she said. "You are not from this continuum." "No," Barry said, stepping toward the view screen. Janeway led him. "I'm not. Your energy source is unprecedented. We have analyzed it for a fractional pause that represented, in Borg terms, considerable processing. 6 minutes and 42 seconds. We do not fully understand it." Another pause, shorter. "This is unusual. I get that a lot. We wish to understand it completely." The Queen's voice carried something that was almost curiosity, not the organic, exploratory curiosity of a scientist, but the colder, more absolute hunger of a system that equated understanding with possession. "You will come to us voluntarily. The process will be less damaging than the alternative." "The alternative being you come get me?" "Yes." Barry glanced back at Janeway. She gave him a microscopic nod. They were at the decision point, the plan's hinge, the moment where preparation became action. He looked back at the view screen. "All right," he said. "I'll come to you." He paused. "But I'm doing it my way." He was already moving before the Queen could respond, the speed force igniting around him in a cascade of gold-white lightning that lit the entire bridge. Janeway heard Harry's sharp intake of breath, saw Tom's hands grip the helm instinctively, felt the energy output of Barry's acceleration as a physical pressure against the air of the bridge. Then he phased through the hull and was gone. "Tracking," Tuvok said immediately. "He's crossed the distance to the cube in." A pause containing genuine surprise. 4.2 seconds. "He's inside." 85%, Janeway thought. Moving at that speed. "Lock onto his biosign the moment B'Elanna's algorithm gives you a window," she said. "The instant he's clear of the central plexus, you beam him out. Not a second later." "Understood," Tuvok said. "And Tuvok." "Captain?" She looked at the cube. At the vast, consuming geometry of it. At the place where Barry Allen had just run, alone and at speed, into the heart of 11,000 drones and a queen who wanted to take everything he was and make it hers. "Full weapons ready," she said quietly. "If this goes wrong, I want to be able to make them regret it." "Already prepared," Tuvok said. "I anticipated the instruction." Inside the cube, somewhere in the humming dark of 11,000 connected minds, the speed force was about to introduce itself. The inside of a Borg cube was nothing like Barry had imagined and exactly like Seven had described. It was vast in the way that only spaces designed without regard for organic comfort could be vast. Cathedral ceilings of conduit, and machinery stretching into a darkness broken only by the cold green light of active technology, the rhythmic pulse of power systems that never slept because the collective never slept, the constant low vibration of 11,000 biological organisms converted into something that was neither fully alive nor fully machine. The air tasted of ozone and recycled atmosphere and something else underneath both, something organic and sad that Barry couldn't name and didn't want to. He moved through it at a speed calibrated for navigation rather than escape. Fast enough that individual drones couldn't track him, slow enough that he could read his surroundings against Seven's schematic, which he held in memory with the practiced clarity of someone who had learned that the difference between a good plan and a disaster was usually the ability to remember where the exits were. The drones he passed didn't pursue. They tracked, heads turning with the synchronized precision of a single consciousness operating multiple bodies. But they didn't move to intercept. They were waiting for instruction. The Queen was watching through their eyes, observing, still calculating. She was letting him walk to the central plexus. Barry understood this. He ran toward it anyway. The central plexus was the architectural heart of the cube, the neural hub where the greatest concentration of drone interface nodes maintained the collective's shared consciousness, where the hive mind was most densely expressed in physical space. Seven had described it as the place where the Borg were most themselves. Walking into it, Barry thought she had been precise. The plexus was a circular chamber approximately 40 meters across, its walls lined floor to ceiling with interface alcoves, every alcove occupied, every drone connected through the neural interface that linked individual consciousness to the vast, cold democracy of the hive mind. The green light was stronger here. The vibration was deeper. The air had the quality of a room where something enormous was always thinking. The Borg Queen materialized at the chamber's center with the theatrical precision of a being who understood that entrance mattered. She was simultaneously beautiful and wrong, the head and shoulders organic, the spine and lower body mechanical, the whole assembled with the Borg's characteristic philosophy that perfection required the synthesis of both. She looked at Barry with eyes that were cataloging and intimate at once, the gaze of someone who was already planning what to do with something before they had finished acquiring it. "You came directly to the plexus," she said. "You understand its significance." Seven explained it well. Something moved across the Queen's face, recognition, and beneath it, something that might have been the Borg equivalent of irritation. Annika. She retains knowledge she should not. She studied Barry with the focused hunger he had felt through the view screen, closer now, more specific. Your energy field is extraordinary. We have never encountered its like. A fundamental force from another continuum, expressed through organic biology. She tilted her head. You will be the most remarkable addition to the collective in decades. I'm not joining, Barry said. Resistance. I know. Futile. I've been briefed. He kept his voice level, kept his body still, kept the speed force steady at its 85% baseline, visible, present, not concealed. He needed her to see it. He needed her to want it badly enough to move. But I want you to understand something before you try. What you're reaching for, the speed force, it's not a technology. It's not a biological system. It doesn't work the way everything else you've ever assimilated works. We are aware of anomalies in our projections, the Queen said, moving closer with the slow certainty of something that had never learned to hurry. We have accounted for them. You haven't, Barry said. Because the speed force isn't just mine. It has its own judgment. And it doesn't want to be assimilated any more than I do. The Queen raised one hand. Around the chamber's perimeter, drones stepped forward from their alcoves with the synchronized inevitability of a tide, neural interface tendrils extending, not the crude assimilation tubules of standard drone deployment, but something more refined, more specific, a targeted approach that confirmed Seven's prediction that the collective would adapt its methodology for this unprecedented acquisition. Barry let them get close. Not because he had no choice. He could have moved at the first step, been through the hull and back aboard Voyager before the drones crossed half the distance. He let them get close because the plan required proximity, required the neural interfaces to make genuine contact, required the speed force to feel the nanoprobes attempting their mapping process before it responded. Seven's model required real engagement. A near miss would propagate nothing through the hive mind. The first interface tendril touched his forearm. What happened next was not an explosion. It was more intimate than that, and more vast. The speed force, that living, dimensional, non-corporeal intelligence that had chosen Barry Allen as its conduit across years and crises and impossible choices, felt the nanoprobes begin their mapping process and responded with the particular decisiveness of something ancient and fundamental that had been poked by something that did not understand what it was touching. The discharge moved outward from Barry's skin in a wave of gold-white lightning that was simultaneously physical and something else, something that existed in the dimensional layer adjacent to normal space where the speed force propagated. It hit the drone's neural interface and traveled through it, through the connection, into the hive mind, following the pathways that the collective used to share consciousness across 11,000 individual bodies. And what the speed force sent through those pathways was not a signal the Borg had any architecture to receive. It was motion. Pure, fundamental, dimensional motion, the speed force expressing itself in the only language it possessed, flooding the collective's neural network with kinetic energy in a form the hive mind's consciousness had never processed and could not filter. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. Drones across the chamber staggered simultaneously. Not damaged, not destroyed, but disrupted, the hive mind's smooth consensus fractured by an input it could not integrate. The Queen's composure shattered for the first time, her face cycling through expressions with the rapid instability of a system encountering genuine error. She took a step backward. The neural interfaces retracted. Through the chamber walls Barry could feel, rather than hear, the propagation continuing. The speed force discharge traveling the neural network outward from the plexus, touching drone after drone after drone, each contact producing the same disruption, the hive mind's shared consciousness stuttering like a signal hitting interference across its entire bandwidth simultaneously. Drones began to disconnect. Not all of them, not even most of them, but in clusters around the plexus. The neural interface disruption was severe enough that individual drones were losing their connection to the collective, consciousness returning to bodies that had not been individual for years or decades, the sudden terrible gift of singular awareness arriving without preparation or context. They stood in their alcoves with expressions that Seven had described with painful accuracy. Lost, isolated, present in a way that was both liberation and catastrophe. "What have you done?" the Queen said, and this time it carried the specific frequency of something that had encountered a genuine threat to its fundamental nature. The composure was gone. The cataloging hunger was gone. What remained was older and more honest. "What is this energy?" "The speed force," Barry said, already moving toward the hull exit point, the speed force blazing around him at full discharge now, the 85% that had been building all day expressing itself completely. "It's not yours. It was never going to be yours." His communicator, the Starfleet badge Janeway had given him 8 hours ago, calibrated to Voyager's frequency, crackled. B'Elanna's voice, sharp with controlled urgency. "Barry, we have a transporter lock. Tuvok's ready." He paused at the chamber threshold, looking back at the Queen, at the disrupted plexus, the disconnected drones finding themselves for the first time in years, the hive mind flickering like a light in wind. "Some things," he said, to the Queen and to the collective and to the 11,000 individuals temporarily reclaiming themselves in alcoves throughout this vast dark machine, "can't be assimilated. They can only be met." He tapped the badge. The transporter took him home. He materialized in Transporter Room 2 in a cascade of gold lightning that left scorch marks on the pad and a reading on every sensor aboard Voyager that B'Elanna would spend 3 weeks attempting to fully document. For a moment he simply stood there, chest rising and falling, the speed force settling around him like weather after a storm, present, quieter, the particular stillness of an energy that had expressed itself completely and was now returning to baseline. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked at them with the expression of a man checking that everything was still attached and finding the answer, for now, satisfactory. Janeway was waiting outside the transporter room when he emerged, which told him something about how closely she had been monitoring his biosign during the transit. She looked at him with the comprehensive attention of a captain conducting a rapid assessment, injury, stability, coherence, and apparently found the results acceptable. Because what followed was not a medical order but a simple question. "How do you feel?" "Like I just argued with 11,000 people simultaneously," he said. "And won mostly." She almost smiled. "Come with me." The Borg cube held position for 47 minutes after Barry's extraction. Tuvok tracked it with tactical sensors during every second of those 47 minutes, weapons hot, finger metaphorically on the trigger, running probability calculations that he did not share with the bridge crew because the honest numbers were not conducive to steady nerves. The cube's power readings fluctuated in patterns consistent with Seven's model. The neural network disruption propagating, the hive mind's consensus struggling to re-establish itself across pathways still resonating with speed force discharge. Then, without communication or warning, the cube went to transwarp and left. The collective departure of something 3 kilometers across that had been sitting 50,000 kilometers off the bow produced, on Voyager's bridge, a silence that lasted approximately 4 seconds before Tom Paris said, "Did that just work?" in the voice of a man who had learned not to celebrate prematurely but was finding the discipline extremely difficult. "Partially," Seven said, studying the departing transwarp signature with the focused attention of someone parsing data that was also personal history. "The neural disruption was significant but not permanent. The collective will recover its consensus. However," she paused, pulling up a secondary reading. 17 drones in the central plexus experienced complete disconnection from the hive mind during the discharge event. Their neural interfaces were disrupted beyond immediate restoration. Another pause. "They are no longer part of the collective. The bridge absorbed this." 17 individuals, Chakotay said quietly. 17 individuals. Seven confirmed. Something in her voice, carefully controlled, suggested that this number was not an abstraction to her. The cube will not have the resources to reassimilate them during its withdrawal. They will require. She selected the word with precision. Assistance. Janeway looked at her. "Can we get them off that cube before it goes to warp? The transwarp threshold is in approximately 4 minutes. Targeting 17 specific biosigns through Borg jamming, transporting them safely." B'Elanna was already at her console, hands moving. "It's theoretically possible. The algorithm I built for Barry's extraction gives us a framework. 17 simultaneous locks." "Do it," Janeway said. What followed was 4 minutes of the most concentrated engineering effort B'Elanna Torres had produced in 7 years of daily miracles, culminating in 17 simultaneous transporter locks acquired in the final 90 seconds before the cube hit transwarp threshold, and 17 people, former drones, newly individual, confused and frightened and present in a way they hadn't been in years, materializing across 4 transporter pads in a cascade of shimmer that the transporter chief would later describe as the most complicated thing she had ever witnessed, and the most worthwhile. The cube left without them. Barry spent the hours after the Borg withdrawal in sickbay, not as a patient but as a presence. Moving between the 17 former drones who were experiencing the particular disorientation of consciousness returning to bodies that had forgotten what consciousness felt like, offering the uncomplicated steadiness of someone who understood, in a different but genuine way, what it meant to be changed by something vast and then have to find yourself again afterward. Seven worked alongside him. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The doctor monitored biosigns and administered carefully calibrated neurological support, running on the particular energy of a hologram who had been handed an unprecedented medical challenge and found the experience invigorating in direct proportion to its difficulty. Neelix appeared with food, real food, prepared with the specific emotional intelligence of someone who understood that 17 people relearning individuality might find nourishment meaningful in ways that transcended calories. Janeway observed from the sickbay entrance for a while, watching Barry move through the room with the quiet competence of someone who led not with authority but with presence. Then she went to her ready room and wrote the most unusual log entry of her career. 3 days later, with Voyager holding position near a Class M planet suitable for the former drone's initial recovery and resettlement, Barry Allen sat across from Janeway in her ready room and they addressed the question that had been present since his first moment aboard. "The Speed Force," he said. "It's been building since I got here. The dimensional acclimation B'Elanna predicted." He paused. "I think if I run fast enough, really fast, full capacity fast, I might be able to find the seam. The place where my universe is adjacent to this one." Janeway looked at him steadily. "You think you can get home?" "I think the Speed Force wants me to try." He was quiet for a moment. "It brought me here for a reason. I don't know if that reason was the Borg, or the 17 people in sickbay, or something else entirely. But it feels complete. Like whatever needed to happen, happened." "The Speed Force has opinions about narrative structure," Janeway said, with the particular dry warmth that was her version of humor. "You'd be surprised. He looked out the viewport at the stars, different stars than the ones he knew, arranged in patterns no one from his universe had ever mapped, beautiful in the way that genuinely alien things were beautiful when you had learned to look at them properly. I want you to know something. Before I go. He looked back at her. What you're doing out here, all of you. 70,000 light years from home, and you're still. He searched for the right word and found it. Yourselves. You haven't stopped being explorers. You haven't stopped trying to do right by people you don't have to do right by. He gestured towards sickbay, toward the 17 people finding themselves in its beds. Most people, that far from home, would stop caring about anything beyond survival. Janeway was quiet for a moment. We've thought about it, she said honestly. Some days more than others. But you didn't. But we didn't. Barry nodded slowly. In my universe, we have heroes. People with powers, people with suits, people who fight because they have to or because they choose to. He paused. The people on this ship are the same thing. Just longer range. Janeway looked at him for a long moment, the young man from another dimension, who had boarded a Borg cube alone and come back with 17 rescued souls and a universe temporarily reminded of the cost of consuming rather than connecting. Mr. Allen, she said. It has been genuinely extraordinary to have you aboard. Likewise, Captain. He stood, the speed force brightening around him with the particular quality of something preparing itself, gathering its intent. Tell 7. He paused, finding the words. Tell her the beginning she talked about. It gets easier. Not all at once. But it does. Janeway nodded. I'll tell her. He moved to the viewport. The wide transparency that looked out on stars and darkness, and the infinite distance of a universe that was not his, and the speed force ignited around him completely, gold-white and vast, filling the ready room with a light that was the color of motion itself. One more thing, he said. He looked back at her, and despite everything, the Borg cube, the 17 drones, the dimensional transit, the Hirogen, all of it, he was grinning. The unguarded, slightly reckless grin of someone who had just remembered why they chose this life. You're going to make it home. All of you. He paused. I can't tell you how I know that. Speed Force stuff. But I know it. Janeway felt something she would not have named an official log but carried with her afterward. A warmth that was not quite relief and not quite hope but occupied the luminous territory between them. Live long and prosper, Mr. Allen, she said. Run fast, he replied. Stay curious. The speed force blazed. The viewport filled with gold. And then Barry Allen was gone, a streak of lightning crossing the viewport and vanishing into the dark between stars, moving faster than sensors could track, running through the dimensional seam that the speed force had been building towards since the moment he arrived, finding the place where two universes pressed against each other, and pushing through it with everything he had. The tear opened, brilliant and brief. Then it sealed. Voyager's bridge was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a crew that had witnessed something they would be telling their grandchildren about, assuming they ever made it to the kind of future where grandchildren were possible, which Barry Allen had told their captain, with the certainty of someone whose power was motion and whose gift was forward, that they absolutely would. Tom Paris broke the silence, as he generally did. So, he said, to no one in particular. Normal day. In the end, the speed force brought Barry Allen to the Delta Quadrant not because the universe made mistakes, but because some problems require a different kind of solution, one that moves too fast for bureaucracy, too honest for politics, and too human for the cold calculus of consumption. Voyager carried 17 new souls toward a Class M world and a future the collective had never intended for them. The Borg cube returned to whatever dark geometry it called home, its neural network still resonating with the ghost of an energy it would never fully catalog or understand. The Hirogen Alpha filed no HUD report for this encounter, a silence that, among his kind, constituted the highest possible acknowledgement. Barry Allen crossed the dimensional membrane at a speed that his own instruments couldn't measure, guided by an energy that had always known where he needed to be and trusted him to figure out the why. He arrived back in Central City 3 seconds after he left, the antimatter explosion contained, the city safe, the sky above him the familiar yellow sun blue of home. He stood in the street and caught his breath and thought about a ship full of people choosing, every day, to remain themselves at the edge of the possible. Then he ran. Forward, always forward. As the speed force intended. In the darkness between quadrants, 17 minds learned the sound of their own names. And somewhere in the hive mind's vast, cold memory, a frequency it could not identify and would never stop searching for continued to resonate, gold-white, dimensional, alive, and absolutely, defiantly free. Live long and prosper. Hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories. Thank you for watching.